Jenna.
Jay.
Michael.
Andy.
And Roseville.
And I'm Kiara, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about deaf culture and just the common misconceptions that are within the deaf community. Now, Gallaudet University did a demographic study that showed about 13% of the United States population is deaf, and of this, the children that are born deaf, about 92% are born to hearing parents. Now, you would think they're deaf, they have deaf parents, but that's really not the case at all. Of this 92%, only about 20% ever learn sign language with their children, and only about 4% of that is ever fluent enough to be successful. The three main points I want to focus on are deaf versus deaf. Bear with me, I know they sound exactly the same. The language aspect that's within the deaf community, as well as just the global outlook in the deaf community. Let's start with deaf versus deaf. Now, STAR ASL really highlights the two main categories that deaf will fall under. There is deaf with a capital D and deaf with a lowercase d. Let's start with big D deaf. Now, the people who associate themselves with deaf, this is the stereotypical thing you think about, the people who use sign language, but beyond that, they really do embrace the deaf culture as a whole. They have similar values, they take all the morals that go with it, and beyond the self-identifying factor, there is a pride about this. People who are identified as big D deaf are really proud about being deaf. Now, little d deaf is pretty much the exact opposite. Going back to the 92%, since most deaf children are born to hearing parents, these are the ones who are the most commonly known as little d deaf. They are part of the hearing community. They're more likely to have hearing aids or a cochlear implant, like shown, that helps them process the auditory information. Now for them, they do associate themselves as a hearing person, and they're not really within the deaf community. Now, with this, Kathy Weaver and Thad Starner, they highlight on the parents' side of this. Now, the 20% of parents that will learn sign language with their children has been significantly increasing without the last couple of years, because you see that the speech and learning skills really are exemplified to a higher level if they learn sign language, because it's the most comfortable language for them, for the kids who really aren't really as successful in an oral program, and it really helps them relate to both worlds and have closer relationships in the long run. Moving forward with that to the language aspect. Now, NC Hearing Loss Organization highlights on the three main nonverbal forms of communication within the deaf community, which are ASL, PSE, and SEE. Let's start with American Sign Language. This is a visual language, a language of the hands. And the misconception that comes with this is that sign language is just English on the hands, which it isn't. It has its own grammar, its own sentence structure, its own syntax. Now with PSE, or Pidgin Signed English, they take the ASL grammar, they take the English grammar, and sort of mix it together. This was introduced in sort of a transitional period within the deaf community, and it's not really used as much now, but you will find that students who are learning sign language, especially older students, will kind of fall back on this, because they'll mix up ASL grammar and English grammar, but it's not really used now. Then there is SEE, or Signed Exact English, and it is just that. It is English translated into sign. Now with SEE, you find that there are words that don't exist in ASL that they created specifically for this. Words like the, because, and this is commonly used in the classroom. Because there's such a focus on all these standardized tests and reading comprehension, this is something that they really do use in within the deaf classroom, just to help with the reading comprehension aspect. Now, lastly, I want to look at the global outlook, and this is where all the stereotypes really do lie. When you hear deaf or signing or whatever it may be, unless you're like within the deaf community or know a lot about it, you might think that there is just signing. But just like there is different countries that have their own language, there are different sign languages in different countries. There's American Sign Language, British Sign Language, French Sign Language, Spanish Sign Language, and there's a whole list. Now, the World Deaf Organization recognized not only the difference on a national level, but on a regional level as well. When you go around, even in just our country, there are different dialects and different accents in different areas. And this is the same for sign language as well. Since the grammar is portrayed mostly through facial expression and body movements, wherever you learn sign language really reflects this. So in different regions, you might have more exaggerated movements or a lot of different facial expressions. So there is accents in sign language. finally, just to recap on the things that we talked about, there is deaf versus deaf, one being a pride thing, self-identity, and one being people who have a hearing loss who really associate themselves in a hearing world and not a deaf world. There is a language aspect, which is ASL, PSE, SEE, and also English or any other verbal forms of communication. With language, there is, just because there is little d deaf and big D deaf, there doesn't mean there isn't a spectrum. Just because you are little d deaf doesn't mean you can't sign. And just because you are big D deaf doesn't mean you can't use English. There is a whole spectrum with that. And the global outlook really is just like with any culture, there is a lot of diversity within the different communities. And so I'd like to leave you with this. The next time you might see two people signing, maybe you've seen a sign that there's a deaf person present in the neighborhood, or you see someone with a hearing aid, really don't jump to that conclusion. A lot of the stereotypes stem from that. So you have to be aware that there is a lot of diversity within the community and within the culture, and not to just jump to conclusions based on appearance. Thank you for your time and attention.
Jenna.
Jer.
Michael?
Andy.
And Rosemary.